What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And we are going to be putting out our prediction, thoughts, opinions, etc. on the potential ban restricted announcement, what it could potentially look like come August 26th. It's probably one of the most anticipated BNRs this year, obviously given what's been going on in the Pioneer format for most of this year to what has been going on in Modern here recently and kind of some of the backlash that Wizards has faced, letting some bird wizard kind of run around and kind of terrorize the format a little bit and kind of justify by waiting, which I think is kind of weird, and you could probably figure out what my guess / prediction is going to be for that format. But we're going to be going over Standard, Modern, Pioneer, and Legacy, just because I think Standard and Legacy are probably the most clear-cut, straightforward you're going to get as far as these formats go. And then kind of from there, Modern and Pioneer, of course, is just kind of this weird kind of slippery road we're going to be going down. Modern, of course, we are in the RCQ Season 4, and we have the RC at the beginning of October, like 4th through the 6th, that is going to feature the Pioneer format as its main event at the Regional Championship. So, of course, these formats are a little bit more important now in the short term, and, of course, what's going to happen here is going to determine kind of the long-term health of the format and what we could potentially see at the Regional Championship for Pioneer, and then what could potentially proceed going forward, getting ready for the first Pro Tour of the year, or maybe even, how Standard's going to look at the World Championship in Las Vegas. But with all that preamble and stuff out of the way, before we get into our own predictions, thoughts, opinions, so on and so forth, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where I talk a lot about the Modern and Pioneer format and produce some other longer form videos, hopefully with some other longer term projects that are going to be a lot bigger than the ones I usually do coming up here soon, because I have some pretty good ideas, or I think are pretty good ideas. So if you want to be around for that, you want to check that out, whatever, be sure to subscribe, ring notification bell, all that fun, happy stuff. It's a great way to support me and my content for free, and it helps us get closer to our goal of 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I'm kind of hoping to hit it before Regional Championship Washington, D.C. I think it'd be pretty cool. I'm going to be there playing in the main event, so, if you happen to watch my channel and you happen to see me at the Regional Championship, I would love if you say hi. I've had a few people at some other local events that I've went to actually come up and, talk to me for a little bit and say hi and everything, and I thought that was one of the coolest things ever. And I've even had some people on Moto recognize me as well, so that to me is just really cool. And that's kind of the fun part, I think, of being a content creator, is just you're out in the wild and someone recognizes you and everything. I appreciate all the comments, all the nice words, everything like that. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead, let's talk about we're going to start with Standard first, and then we're going to kind of work our way back. So we'll go Standard into Pioneer into Modern into Legacy, and then we'll kind of wrap this thing up. So we'll go ahead and start with the Standard format and some of my thoughts on that format. So I think the easiest one of these formats is the Standard format. Of course, we just had a rotation with the release of Bloomburrow, so I think that there shouldn't be any changes made to the Standard format. Now, that sounds kind of crazy because, again, we just got Bloomburrow into the format. We have rotation and everything, and it's all kind of wild and crazy stuff going on there. Of course, I think Golgari has a huge win or not even a win percentage, but a huge percentage of the metagame, and there's a few other decks that people are trying to kind of still play that didn't really lose too much from rotation. And of course there's the Innkeeper's Talent plus Vraska combo, where you can poison your opponent out of the game after you spent 12 mana total on your 2 cards that really aside from the third chapter or third level of the class, doesn't really affect the other part of the combo until you get to the last level. So I don't think there needs to be any changes made to the format yet. I think it's still brand new. People are still exploring it, and I think it's kind of a shame really that we have MTG Arena, and that's where people play mostly their Standard and everything like that, and I think that's totally fine. And of course Arena is going to be running some of its own events where it's probably doing Explorer and Historic, but then you have Standard going on there as well, and I think that you'll have some decent Standard events going on. Just kind of a shame that we don't really have anything that really cares about the Standard format currently, because it seems like Standard's been pretty good, honestly, the last probably year or two since we started getting back into paper play, and just maybe more people are starting to go to Standard FNMs and stuff. I remember going to Standard FNMs that went on till 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and that was a lot of fun, even if you were miserable the next day. So I think kind of a shame overall that we are not going to really be focusing too heavily on standard as a format, especially with like the new rotation and everything, and kind of like the format being pretty fresh. But that said, I don't think standard really needs any changes. I think that we'll have a decent amount of stuff kind of going on in standard up until the the World Championship, where I believe Duskmourn will be available by then, because I think it's going to be released like a week or two before the regional championship in Washington DC. So when we get to the World Championship in Las Vegas, we should see Duskmourn be included in that. So really no premiere events for Bloomburrow to kind of shine, even though I think it's a set that's been really cool. I've been enjoying drafting it, playing sealed, things like that, and I kind of look forward to exploring the standard format. But overall, the TLDR of all this, I don't expect any changes to be made to the standard format. I expect them to, at best, maybe make mention of kind of like the combo and stuff, and maybe keeping an eye on it as they normally do, but that not necessarily meaning that it's going to be up for discussion come the next banning when we get Duskmourn, and we're about, I believe, a month into that format. So yep, no changes expected for standard. Let's go ahead and hop over to Pioneer. So next, we're going to be getting into Pioneer, and I think this one is a little bit trickier than some of the other formats. I think while Modern and Legacy definitely have a card or cards that absolutely need to be banned for one reason or another, I think Pioneer, it's a little bit murkier. So I think with the fact that the Rakdos Vampires deck has definitely kind of slowly taken over. I mean, it's been one of the most played decks, if not the most played deck, for a while now, since Pro Tour Murders of Karlov Manor, when it kind of burst onto the scene, putting 2 copies in the top 8 and then winning the tournament. That it has proven to be one of the best and most consistent decks in the format that you can be playing, while not being nearly as explosive as something like Amalia or is it Phoenix. It definitely gives you that, like the floor on this deck is very low, and then you have some very, 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 very aggressive starts that can also be very disruptive to your opponent and make it very hard for them to try to stabilize and even potentially take over the game. Of course, Vein Ripper plus Sorin is a very powerful combo. People calling it like the one-sided like show and tell, where you're just going to be able to put the 6/5 into play. Your opponent's not really going to have a lot of good things to kind of like accomplish its goal of trying to get it off the battlefield. It's going to instantly 2-for-1 them. They're going to have to spend the removal spell. They're going to have to eat one of their own creatures. Even then, if they only have one creature on the board, it's even worse, because your opponent can just kill it in response to the ward trigger, and then your spell is essentially countered because you're not going to have a creature to be able to sacrifice. So can cause some pretty big feel-bad moments, especially when that's kind of like your game plan is just like play a 2-drop, your opponent just goes, boom, Sorin Vein Ripper, and then you're not able to kill it on that turn. It makes it infinitely harder from there when they have available mana. So kind of like the talk is, between those 2 cards, which one gets banned? I actually have Vein Ripper over Sorin. I think Vein Ripper itself is like a fine card, but I think having Sorin kind of enables some different builds of vampires. I think vampires could be kind of a fun archetype. I think you kind of push them away from maybe being Rakdos, because a lot of the reason for being Rakdos was Fable the Mirror Breaker and the 2-mana vampire that, of course, I can never think of its name, Blood Tithe Harvester, just thought of it. And you see a lot of them just play, just basically mono black at that point. So I think that you have some space to maybe go into black-white, where we've seen, the Ixalan vampires kind of come from, where you have some lords and some other things that kind of synergize well with vampires. So I think Sorin might be the better card, at least the one that enables, I think, more design space and the potential for the deck to actually be good, rather than Vein Ripper, which I think could just be a very good mid-range card that you can just play on like turn 6, and when your opponent like kind of rats the board, like this being a follow-up, while not ideal, because you would want all those death triggers, or at least being able to play this and like, okay, if your opponent decides to Supreme Verdict, Wrath of God, whatever type of effect that they have, that they're going to get punished for it by possibly getting drained to death, and just meaning that they can't do it. But I think giving them enough time to where they can afford to Wrath on like turn 4, but if they have to wait until like turn 6 or turn 7, they can get punished by a Vein Ripper as a potential play. So I think I'm okay with Sorin, just because I think it's the more interesting card to kind of build around going forward. From there, I think you have the good argument that if you just stop there, you ban Vayne Ripper or you ban Sorin, then obviously the Rakdos decks period just get worse because it turns out Rakdos mid-range is playing more red cards, but still just playing the Sorin Vayne Ripper combo. So I think you probably have to hit something from Amalia as well, and I think that the easiest card is Wild Growth Walker, kind of for the same reason for Sorin versus Vayne Ripper. I think that Amalia is the more interesting card to kind of build around. I think that you can kind of get some synergies from just, gaining one life multiple times off of different triggers, and then getting to kind of, not really surveil, but, explore with Amalia. And just naturally get to the point where she can blow up the board and attack, or at least just getting a big creature that, that's like a 12-12 or 13-13. You have Dina as well, so you have a little bit of like combo potential there where maybe you don't have this, infinite, I'm going to keep bouncing this over and over, and then, eventually I'm going to drain you, even if I can't necessarily, go infinite or, whatever, draining your opponent for like 12 and then blowing up the board, something of that nature. So I think that, Amalia is the more interesting card. I think Wild Growth Walker is pretty irrelevant without Amalia. So I think in the interest of having Amalia kind of be the thing that you would want people to like play with and maybe explore with is a lot better than people trying to play like explore decks with Wild Growth Walker. So I think that I would prefer Amalia to still be legal, but you just get rid of the other half of the combo that essentially lets you go infinite with exploring and, gaining life and, just setting up kills where you're going to have a lethal creature in play, and then you're also going to have an Aether Flux Reservoir that is going to kill your opponent like a million times over, waiting on the top of your deck, basically requiring your opponent to have like multiple different outs on, a pretty early turn, like the third or fourth turn of the game, which isn't necessarily impossible, but for a lot of decks, it's not very possible, and so I think that that's probably a good sign to just like back it up. Let's do something different here, and like let's get rid of Wild Growth Walker and let's leave Amalia around and see if the community is willing to kind of still build around this card and play around this card, because most of the deck does remain intact and I think is a decent shell at least to start with, and then you just find something to replace Wild Growth Walker in there. Going even further, because I think that the fact that Treasure Cruise has been around for a while too for the Phoenix deck is pretty rough. I think I would just like to see Treasure Cruise gone completely, just for the fact that, the fact that this deck, and a lot of times in my experience, like playing this deck, when you just go do your thing and then you cast a Treasure Cruise, that's really good, because you're going to be able to look at like 4 cards. You've cantrip, you kind of sculpted your hand to that point. All right, now I'm going to draw 3, and you essentially have like all gas, maybe like a few lands in hand, whatever. You're going to be able to ditch them to future Ledger Shudders. You're potentially set up to kind of get back Phoenixes or get even more Phoenixes or draw a bunch of cards to kind of get profs going, things like that. So many games that I've played where just resolving a Treasure Cruise, once or twice has been pretty good. Not to mention, even though it's like a one of like Galvanic Iteration, where, I think most lists play 1, some of them play 2. Playing like 1 and then just getting to like Galvanic Iteration and then cast your Treasure Cruise and just completely fill back up, basically have, like a 3-mana like Time Twister, essentially, is and it's a one-sided Time Twister, is pretty damn good, honestly. And while I think that, just 1 mana draw 3 in a deck that doesn't really have, for a deck like this where it doesn't have any drawback and it's able to use kind of like all parts of the Buffalo, it's going to draw 3 cards. Profs is going to put at least 3 counters on something else. You're going to obviously refresh your hand, so you're going to be very likely to go and get back more Phoenixes if your opponent is able to kind of trade off with some in combat or just end up wiping the board with something like I'm going to say like an Anger of the Gods type effect, but Anger of the Gods obviously would exile them, but some kind of a sweeper effect on those creatures. So I think that you have to go 2 Treasure Cruise at least. I think you have to hit the top 3 decks. Of course, meaning that you throw in Fable as well, because fuck the mono red or like the red mid-range decks. Like, I'm tired of seeing Rakdos. I was tired of seeing Rakdos everywhere when, we had essentially scam format back in Modern. And then, of course, the fact that we've had, Rakdos mid-range like forever in Pioneer in some form, whether it's just like traditional mid-range or it's been Rakdos Vampires. I'm kind of tired of seeing it. I don't think Fable the Mirrorbreaker, plays such a huge critical... I mean, Fable the Mirrorbreaker is like the best red card in the format, hands down. It's a walking 2-for-1. If your opponent can't get rid of the Goblin and it just starts to make the treasure tokens and things like that, you just get a huge mana advantage as well as getting to chip in for damage. And then if the Fable ever flips and your opponent gets to have it where it's not summoning sick and they have any sort of anything on the battlefield, of course, like this plus Blood Scythe Harvester has always been really good, because then you just get to make another treasure token, potentially take down some 4 toughness things and kind of increase as you go, be able to get in for damage, copy Vein Rippers or Chancellor of the Drosses to... or not even Chancellor of the Dross, it's something of the Dross. Either way, like, you're able to get in for tons of damage and kind of punish your opponent. Of course, the combo of having 2 of them in play, so then you're able to make a ton of them on your opponent's end step, untap, and then for however much mana you have, you're able to copy a bunch of something else in the best case scenario. In the worst case, you just make like 12 copies of Fable the Mirrorbreaker, and you attack with a bunch of 2/2s that eventually will close out the game. So depending on how deep they want to go in Pioneer, I think that's how deep that they should go. I think from there, you can argue about stuff from like Lotus Field being banned, because of course, like all the other top decks kind of get hit. You could talk about the, Nibdelite decks, getting to be pretty good for the fact that, all these other decks that they were good against are kind of, a lot weaker. And you could argue that some of them will still see some play, like Amalia, maybe not in its form, obviously right now, but that and the Is It Phoenix decks will probably still be pretty good without Treasure Cruise. They just won't be able to get back 3 or 4 Phoenixes 5, 6, 7 times a game. Then they might be able to do it like 2, 3, 4 times, and I think that's probably better for the format than basically being able to do it every single turn unimpeded without really much interaction from your opponent, aside from like exiling the graveyard or just being able to stop them from attacking altogether. So Pioneer can go pretty deep. I've seen people just, if there's not going to be, mass change, making no changes, which I think is pretty crazy to think, but I can also kind of see the point there, where you ban something like Sorin or Vein Ripper from the Vampires deck, and then I think you just have like a 2-deck race between Amalia and Is It Phoenix, and then you can kind of argue about which deck has the better matchup, etc., and just kind of the rest of the format, like shrugging their shoulders and throwing their hands up, like, I guess whatever, like, fuck us, sure. Like, so I think you have to go pretty deep if you're going to do it to Pioneer. If not, I would like to see no changes, at least for regional purposes, just so I can actually playtest Pioneer and figure out what deck I want to play for the format. Of course, and then looking at Duskmourn to see what cards could kind of upgrade those decks before the event. So that's kind of my take on Pioneer. I would like them to go pretty deep on the format and just kind of give us a whole brand new format for us to explore for like a month up until, Duskmourn's release, and then ultimately the regional championship, and just kind of leave a pretty wide open field, and then give you some time too, that if something ends up being too powerful after making some deep cuts, that you're able to kind of make another emergency announcement with a reasonable amount of time before the regional championship. So that's Pioneer. That was pretty long-winded, so let's go ahead and take a look at Modern. So Modern, I think, is pretty easy for the case of, I think there's one card in particular that needs to go, and there's some arguments for some other cards that need to go. So I think for one, we can mostly agree on this. I thought this would be kind of like a unanimous thing, but it turns out it's not very unanimous, and somehow it's pretty controversial. Of course, Nadu needs to be banned from the format. I think this deck is just too powerful that even if you kind of ban around it, you don't necessarily solve the issue. I think an issue kind of goes beyond just actually playing the game, where it just creates an overall bad experience for kind of like the game that's going on from a spectator perspective and from a player perspective as well. The fact that, thankfully, the tournaments I've been to, I haven't had to play it. I haven't had to play against it, thankfully. And just overall, I think it's just kind of a bad it's a bad experience for players. I mean, you think of like eggs back in like 2012 where, you know, it wasn't deterministic, and for Nadu, there is some boards that are like pretty deterministic where if they have, you know, like 7-8 creatures on board and they've already comboed once and they weren't able to actually like go off and do the thing, chances are they're going to be able to combo off and do the thing unless you have, you know, like Rakdos Charm or something like that. But in general, I don't think that this is kind of like a healthy thing to do. You know, I kind of draw the comparisons of being at like a Hogak or KCI level of like win rate, or I guess even higher, because I think it has a even higher win rate than like Hogak had back in the day, especially after like the Pro Tour and, you know, even leading up to it, I believe at that time. And something like KCI, where I think the deck can be pretty complicated to play. There are some very complicated board states, could lead to matches going way over time, which can put a tournament way behind when it happens. You know, even every other round, at like a 5 or 6 round tournament, you're going over 20 minutes over. It means that you are potentially like an hour to an hour and a half behind schedule, meaning that, you know, instead of a tournament getting over at, you know, maybe like 8 o'clock, it ends up getting over at like 9:30, 10. And then some people have, you know, multiple hour drives home. And I think just overall makes for a pretty bad experience. And, you know, I'm all for starting tournaments earlier. Like all the Seal tournaments that start at like 10 a.m., that's freaking awesome. Even though you have all that prep and stuff that you have to do beforehand and whatever. I think if like Magic tournaments just started at 10 a.m., you know, the fact that like you just go 0-2, it's like noon, and you can just be like, okay, cool. Like even if I have a 2-hour drive home, I still have my whole afternoon to kind of do things. But aside from that, you know, Nadu is probably the most powerful creature in the format. It is doing the most busted things. The thing it's doing, unfortunately, is not necessarily deterministic. Once you assemble Nadu plus Shuko or Outrider Encore, and just in general, like you feel like that the game is over, but it's not technically over. And like I said, from a spectator standpoint, like watching people play Nadu is so painful because you just kind of like want them to start flipping through cards, and technically in the deck you can't necessarily, like you can do that, but it's not like optimal to do it just because you have a bunch of different kind of moving parts and pieces that you need to do them in the right order. And if you fail to do them in the right order, you can lose. So I think just in general, you know, the deck kind of having the vibes of like the Second Sunrise / like Eggs deck from early in Modern, plus being a deck that does win quite a bit, even with, you know, essentially no changes made to the deck. You know, very, very minor tweaks for, you know, improvement purposes, to, you know, the rest of the format kind of making leaps to try to catch up to it. And I think Boros Energy / like Mardu Energy definitely having some pretty good ways of getting caught up to the format. Of course, Boros Energy arguably becoming one of the best decks in the format. I don't think it is, but definitely up there in consistency, where, you know, it's so much better against everything else in the format that you're kind of fine if you get paired up against Nadu. And I think with, you know, the decline of Nadu and like online tournaments and paper, but still managing to hold like a, you know, the highest meta share on according to MTG Goldfish, you know, I think you can make an argument that Boros Energy, you know, is able to kind of take over the format once Nadu goes away. So I think that then we have to kind of keep an eye on some of the energy cards. As far as like the One Ring and Bowmasters, just because it seems like every BNR they come up where, you know, the One Ring starts seeing more play, or like Bowmaster starts seeing a lot of play. And I think that if you have Boros Energy, or like if we assume that in this BNR, it's just Nadu that gets banned, like that's it. You know, if that's the assumption we go off of, then I almost think that cards like the One Ring and Orcish Bowmaster are necessary evil, especially since Wizards has come out and made a statement saying that like they can reprint these cards, especially in some in-universe ways as well. So, I mean, that being pretty cool if, like, for whatever reason you just really hate the Lord of the Rings, or the fact that it mentions the Lord of the Rings or whatever, like if that's the hill that you're willing to die on for some reason, you know, there is potentially some in-universe versions that we will get at some point. Hopefully soon, because these cards are pretty expensive, and if they are going to be something that is considered banned or kind of like on the watch list for a while, I think I'd rather spend, you know, $15-$20 per copy of like the One Ring instead of, you know, $80-$100 on the One Ring to only be able to play it for a short time anyway. Especially when, at least for the case of Nadu is like the best deck. So like if I had to spend like $100 to be able to play that deck at an RCQ, heck yeah, I would rather play that than spend like $100 just on a playset of the One Ring. But, you know, that's just kind of like some modern like keeping track type stuff. I think Nadu is like the only thing that is all but guaranteed for the list. I think you could potentially see the One Ring, you could potentially see Bowmasters end up there, but I don't think it's necessary unless you're going to also hit something from Boros, which I don't know exactly what you take away from the Boros deck. Maybe Amp Raptor, just because it does give you kind of a lot of value, and there's like plenty of turns where you can go and play, you know, Guide of Souls on turn 1 into Amp Raptor, and then Amp Raptor is going to go and get a Blood Moon and lock your opponent out of the game potentially, or get you a Fable. You know, it could be a card that just gives you too much value for, you know, too little investment, even just playing it naturally on like turn 2 with no other energy sources granting you anything. Just the fact that these like cascade type effects have, you know, essentially not really ruined Magic, but definitely are kind of hard to interact with, and I think just give you like so much value that for a lot of decks it's kind of hard for them to keep up unless they're also playing those kinds of cards. So I think that kind of wraps up the summary of Modern. Nadu just needs to go. I think that even if you kind of ban around it, it's still going to be a deck that people, you know, probably play even more. I think you probably would expect Nadu to see a lot more play, unless you ban like Shuko and Outrider Encore. Then, you know, maybe they have to get a little bit more creative about what's going on. But we've seen plenty of Nadu decks go off with something like with like Sylvan Safekeeper and things like that. So who knows? It'd be up in the air for me. I think you'd have to ban a lot around Nadu for it to be bad. So I think if you want to ban the least amount of cards, you just probably get rid of the card as a whole and kind of move on with life. Potentially, I guess maybe you could see like some kind of errata made to it, but I don't think that you would end up seeing something like that, just because that's not something that, you know, Wizards has typically done to cards, is errata them in a way where they functionally work differently. You've seen erratas where cards are just kind of printed with like the wrong text on it, and then they just kind of fix the text so it works the way that it was intended to, and that's usually what ends up happening. So maybe we could see it here, but very unlikely. I think Nadu just ends up seeing the ban hammer. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at our last format in Legacy, and this one's going to be pretty easy if I do say so myself. Legacy players rejoice, Nadu. Probably Nadu should be banned in that format as well, but definitely getting rid of Grief. I played in a Legacy tournament probably like a few months ago, and I remember just playing, a Legacy event, playing Reanimator, and the fact that the deck had so many different scam starts that were just like so good, and the fact that like, okay, I'm just going to, like, you don't even have to commit to it, where you're just like, okay, I'm going to grief you, and then you look at their hand, and it's like, oh, they have like a Force of Will in here? Okay, I'm not going to get back the grief, I'm just going to, you know, then cast Dark Ritual, and then, you know, discard my Atraxa, get it back, and I'm going to get so much value, and I'm just going to like refill my hand, I'm going to start the game with an Atraxa in play, and you're going to be on essentially a Mold of 6, is pretty good. Also the fact of like, if your opponent has like two different things, like, guess what? Like, I'm already going to take the one Force of Will. Now I'm going to try to get this grief back. So I'm either going to take your other Force of Will, or you're going to have to force pitch something else, and you're essentially going to be down to 3 cards, and I'm still going to be able to, you know, have my turn where I go Dark Ritual, you know, bin this, go and get it back, and, you know, do some crazy things. So grief, you know, bye-bye, see ya. Like, probably lasted a lot longer in the format than it needed to, in all honesty, just because I've seen enough players like bitch about it. I've seen, you know, the kind of like the meta data or whatever, like how many decks are seeing like what play, and you know, just like Modern, where some other decks will occasionally maybe win from time to time. The fact that a deck is still seeing a considerable amount of play, putting a decent to a lot of decks into the top 8. You know, on a very consistent basis, and the format is not really, you know, it's trying to evolve or trying to do things, but it's basically zeroed in on like, this is the best way to beat something, and there's no like innovation or changes or anything like that, then I think it leads to a very unhealthy format, which leads to very unhappy players, which means you have a format that players aren't really looking forward to playing. And so I think Legacy already kind of gets like unfortunately the short end of the stick when it comes to, you know, competitive organized play. At least from like Wizards of the Coast, I think you have like the very dedicated like player base. So I think it's just best to, like, if you're not going to support it, you know, from a competitive standpoint, if you're Wizards, at least try to make the format healthy so that other stores can kind of do their thing. So I think Grief needs to go. I've seen like Nadu popping up in play. That's basically the extent of like where my Legacy knowledge goes. If there's anybody that watches my videos that cares about Legacy and, you know, wants to, you know, kind of inform me better in the comments about it, You know, I think Grief is like absolutely a card that needs to go from that format. But as far as like Nadu or like anything else, you know, I'm not quite sure. At least not a strong enough opinion on it to where I'm willing to say that like, yes, this should be banned, or no, it shouldn't be. It's fine, or anything like that. So yeah, that is Legacy, and that is going to do it for this video. This is my ban restricted preview / predictions. I guess probably more predictions than anything. I hope that some of these changes happen. I think the modern RCQ season is kind of waiting to be saved by this like BNR. I mean, how many people that I played, you know, the RCQs that I've played at, where, you know, just the complaining about Nadu and how good the Nadu deck has been, and, you know, seeing other people still win with the deck and other people just, you know, crush with it. I mean, it's been one of the best decks in the format for a long time. It's been the best deck probably since before the Pro Tour, and, you know, after the Pro Tour, even with very little innovation and everyone else kind of, you know, getting to, you know, get to a point where they've evolved like multiple times just to kind of be able to slightly keep up, but I still think be a step or two behind the deck. It's just a good enough reason to like just ban Nadu, and then maybe at some point in the future you can bring it back, but is what it is. And then of course Pioneer, you know, probably needs some pretty big sweeping changes to, you know, just overall alter the format and make it look like something that's completely different from what we've seen, because we've seen a lot of the top decks just over the last like few years just kind of stay towards the top and continue to be the best decks. So I think that you should look for some pretty big changes, or look at like no changes before, you know, a major event, and then kind of make changes based on that event. So that's going to be this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what you think is going to happen in this BNR announcement. Of course, there's probably going to be some people that tell me that I'm crazy, that Nadu's not going to get banned. Nadu's fine, whatever. You know, if you have that opinion, good for you. I don't think that the, you know, I've been told that I don't understand the data, but I still don't think that I know what has actually come out from any of the events. You know, you could point to somewhere Boros Energy maybe is doing a lot better than Nadu, but I also think that between essentially an impending ban is not a good reason to continue to play a deck that is not going to essentially live, when Boros Energy is probably the best deck outside of Nadu that is probably worth playing, that actually has a decent Nadu matchup, if anything. So, you know, let me know what you think in the comments down below of, you know, the potential BNR that we're going to get next week, what your predictions are. I'd love to hear them down in the comments, things like that. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.